Monte Maxwell, one of the great artists who is a product of SAISD, an organist with quite a job at our Naval Academy.
Yes.
My stars. There's a handful of wonderful organ jobs in the world, and you have one of them.
And I'm very grateful for that.
I believe you. I don't even know how to compare for our audience when I say a handful of organ jobs in our world. In my lifetime, those organ jobs have diminished. There are not as many great organs, and so young people aren't going into the field of organ as a major. And you not only did, but you landed and earned this great job. But before we talk about the Naval Academy, which is a great place, let's talk about, you grew up here.
Yes.
And have a mother here who was a great contributor to your upbringing. Now would be a good time for you to say, oh, yes.
Oh, yes. Most definitely.
And you went through SAISD schools. Tell me which schools you attended.
I started out at Juilliard Elementary School and went on to Lincoln Junior High School and then Lakeview High School.
Wow. And you and another marvelous musician that our community gets to hear more often because he lives in our state, Michael Schneider, both from Lakeview High School, products of a great community who supports their young people and are so proud of you, Monty and Michael, in what you've accomplished. You told me prior to this interview that there were some people besides family who you feel encouraged you greatly. Tell our audience who some of those people have been.
Particularly some great teachers that I had here in San Angelo. At Lakeview, Shirley Robison was the director of the choir program there at Lakeview and was very influential and encouraging all my way along. Had great piano teachers, Dorothy Howard and Ralph Bennett, Joe Krecklow, and Mrs. Bob Mosier. Dorothy is still with us and still makes music. They're two wonderful, wonderful ladies, very inspiring, and the church as well. My home church, First Baptist Church here in San Angelo, has been a very avid part of my life and in my faith and my music making and opportunities to make music and to grow.
And I, just in my limited musical background, if I hadn't had opportunities at the school and church to play often, I don't know that I could have developed just to the extent that I have. Would you say that's true for you as well?
Most definitely. Playing in front of other people is a huge growing experience and opportunity, and it's very different than just sitting in your studio or your living room practicing. You need to share that music with other people, and you grow in turn as you do that.
You left San Angelo and went to TCU, and that school is such a great school, not just because they're now doing so well in football, but you got an opportunity there to study. Were you mainly studying keyboard as a whole, piano and organ? When did you pick up organ?
Well, I began with the piano at about age 9, and I heard for the first time in my life a pipe organ at First Baptist Church in that same year. And when I heard the majestic sounds that come forth from organ pipes, I was entranced. And I just loved the beauty of that sound. And I said, someday I want
when your
to
feet meet the pedals?
Yes, yeah. Someday I want to learn to play one of those things. And there was no teacher here in San Angelo that taught organ. And so I continued to study piano And I would buy organ recordings. The first one I ever owned, I bought in Austin, and read a lot, search. This is before the days of the internet, so I would go to the library, check out recordings and books here at our library in San Angelo, and read and read and read, and just find out all that I could. And then I very boldly and cautiously asked for permission to play on the church organ one Sunday afternoon for an hour or so. And because I came from the background that you didn't do anything unless you were invited to.
Especially with great pianos and organs.
Yes, yes. So I had bought a piece of music down at what was then King Music Company downtown, and sat at the piano and learned the keyboard parts at the piano and played or assumed where the pedals would be, and played over blind spaces with my feet in front of the piano, and learned this piece. And so the music director of the church graciously said, well, sure, you can come down and play on the organ. And I had watched the organist so much that I knew how to turn the thing on, how to operate it. I'd read enough and held notes while the organ tuner would tune. And I sat there that day and I played Purcell's Trumpet Voluntary over and over and over for probably several hours. And I was done.
You were hooked.
I was hooked.
So did the organist feel that it was okay for you to come back and play? Because organists and some pianists they become possessive in order to take care of the very expensive instruments. I meant that in a complimentary way, but not just anyone. Even if the music director says it's okay, it's got to be organist give you permission.
Yes, and the organist, the church was just very, very warm and very supportive, and so then I began buying other pieces of music, and I went to the music store in Austin, and I purchased a piece called Toccata and Fugue in D minor of Johann Sebastian Bach. I learned it at the piano and took it to the organ and taught it to myself, and I just kept learning pieces that way until it came time to look for a university. And I began doing a lot of research during my high school years, calling universities, organ teachers, talking to them and meeting with them, and had some really nice offers from different places, but I was most impressed with what I found at Texas Christian University and the organ professor there at the time, Emmett Smith. And I entered a competition for a scholarship and won the competition. I was very blessed to receive some great aid through that, and ended up going to Texas Christian University and having a great teacher there. And then that opened the door for the Curtis Institute when that invitation came along to study at Curtis.
And remind our audience where that is.
The Curtis Institute is in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and a great school. Other musicians like Leonard Bernstein was a graduate of Curtis, and Samuel Barber, amongst many others. And then on to the Juilliard School.
And you were at Curtis how long, and Juilliard how long?
2 years at each.
Mm-hmm. And was either the Curtis Institute or Juilliard more significant, or were they significant in different ways toward molding you into the organist that you are?
I would have to say they were significant in different ways. The Curtis Institute is a very, very selective institution.
And small.
Yes. The student body is comprised of 175 students, more or less. And it is probably the most difficult music school to get into in the world, and very demanding, very intense, but also very warm. I call it musical home. But you knew when you walked through those doors there was a great level of expectation, and you were there to meet that expectation and nothing less. And that was one of your absolute best. And that was a real wonderful experience, because we had to perform for each other in the organ class every week. You went to your organ lesson in a coat and tie. You performed in organ class in coat and tie. There was high tea every Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, where the silver and the china came out, and all of the student body came together in this beautiful old mansion where the conservatory was located. And you never knew what great conductor or opera star or violinist or pianist would be a guest at tea from any part of the world. So it afforded you the opportunity to engage with not only your fellow students, who are the stars of tomorrow, but with other current international superstars in the music world.
My goodness. What had prepared you for that kind of rigor?
I would have to say my training at TCU. Emmett Smith was a great teacher, a great encourager, but he also set very high standards. Never raised his voice once at me. I never saw him do that with any student. But he also had a level of expectation. But his training came from Paris and was of great demanding quality. And so he passed that on to us. And playing at Curtis, playing a new memorized work every week for your classmates, which are the most severe critics there
Without
are.
a doubt.
was a great growing experience, because it ultimately prepared you to play under the most extreme duress. Live audiences, packed houses, television, didn't matter. You were to keep going no matter what. And focus. Discipline was huge. And if there's anything I could share with young people of today, as well as people with more experience, discipline is the most important thing. Never neglect that, because it's what can put you on top of the mountain. And it involves a lot of work.
It sets apart, in so many ways, people.
It does.
Many more people than we think are given gifts, but the discipline part sets them apart. I see that with professional adults. They've been blessed with gifts, but the discipline sets them apart. Then you went to, after a TCU experience with Professor Smith and your Philadelphia experience, you went to Juilliard, and Juilliard is one of a handful of renowned preparatory schools for the fine arts. What did it do for you that you hadn't already experienced at your prior two places?
It had some great benefits. One being in the heart of New York and Manhattan really opened up a lot of doors, because you continued to associate with other great musicians from across the world. Some other great teachers there, some that were on both faculties at Curtis and Juilliard, and would just take the train between Philadelphia and New York. But some more intense coursework in keyboard studies and historical aspects of music. And I had the same teacher, the same organ teacher, both at Curtis and Juilliard, who chaired both departments. And the large organ department at Juilliard as well, with the same practices of great discipline in performing weekly new memorized organ works.
And there's something about the adrenaline that's flowing in New York, from my experience, that is, there are not many places that can replicate that kind of flow in that city. But it's so competitive, the whole city, because there's so many people that come there to want to arrive at a certain level of performance. You then, after Juilliard, what did you do?
I stayed in Manhattan for another 6 years, performing and teaching. I taught at the King's College, a Christian liberal arts college north of Manhattan in Westchester County, and Nyack College on the opposite side of the Hudson, north of the city, about 45 minutes. Played at 2 churches on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, and traveled around the country performing, and continued to do overseas volunteer missionary work that was rooted through First Baptist Church and Taylor Henley and his wife Eva.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was very, very busy, the equivalent of balancing about 5 jobs.
Which is the hardest thing. So you then, right after that, 6 years of playing and performing, then did you go to the Naval Academy?
Yes, I received a phone call one day from the chairman at Curtis and Juilliard, and he said, I got a phone call today from the Naval Academy, and they're doing a national search for this position, and they called me for recommendations, and he said, for some reason, immediately your name came to my mind, and the more I've thought about it all day, I think this position is you, and they're going to be calling you, and I think you should talk to them. So here we sit, almost 15 years later.
And your position is what?
I am the director of chapel music and instrumental activities, or professor. I conduct the 3 chapel choirs that are there, and work with all of the midshipmen who play instruments and conduct the orchestra, and play organ concerts, play all the major services, weddings, funerals, memorial services, concerts, put together those concerts, take many of the midshipmen traveling when we do things outside the Naval Academy grounds, which can be anywhere from a few hours away to across the country or abroad, and oversee the maintenance of the very fine instrument in the Naval Academy Chapel, which is a handsome thing.
I've not been to that chapel, but compare it to the Air Force Academy Chapel and its organ.
It's a very interesting thing because the 3 service academies, the primary service academies, I would say, Air Force, West Point, and Naval Academy, the structures themselves are vastly different. It's like 3 flavors of ice cream: chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry.
The chapel itself.
The chapel itself.
Okay.
The chapel at Air Force is more avant-garde. Mm-hmm. It's a modern structure, and the organ is of one particular nature and design. The chapel at West Point is very Gothic, and the instrument there is of another completely different design, and the chapel at Naval Academy is more Romanesque because it is in the form of a cross, and it started out to be a Greek cross. Now it's more of a Roman cross when the building was expanded in its size in 1940. So the 3 are vastly different, and the instruments that are found in the chapels are very, very different characters, play different music very well. But they're just 3 different designs, and so it's fascinating to visit the 3.
Well, isn't it interesting personalities that great instruments take on?
Yes.
I look forward. I'm going to come and hear you. Now I feel absolutely compelled to come and hear and compare in my mind's eye and my ears the 2 instruments. When I was a few months ago, last fall, at the Air Force Academy on a visit, and got to hear they were rehearsing there, and it's the first time I'd really heard that instrument played. And it's mainly windows that, and so it does. And then the flooring, the materials that chapel is composed of, I felt like had a huge impact on the sounds
Definitely.
that I was getting. But I look forward to hearing, do you think yours is more mellow, more bright? What do you think about your organ?
It is designed to be more of a romantic instrument and leans towards the English cathedral-esque sound and type of sound and tonal design. So
between bright, like the brightness of a Steinway as compared to some other pianos, compare that with your organ.
It would be a warmer, more robust sound.
Okay, I think I can get a little feel for that.
Lots of color, lots of orchestral colors, so it plays transcriptions very well, which would lead me to share the wonderful experience that I had for several years playing at the John Wanamaker department store in Philadelphia, which has the largest playing pipe organ in the world. And if you've never been to that store, you cannot go to Philadelphia without visiting Wanamaker's and hearing that magnificent organ.
Well, and that's available on iTunes, even though it can at least give you a person a taste of that great organ.
Yes. Yeah, it's magnificent, and it was a great inspiration to me in the tonal design of what we've done at the Naval Academy and the changes and revisions we've made to the instrument there and are currently making. So
do you consider that, is it the Monte Maxwell organ?
It could be said that. Now, fingerprints are all over it.
And you have helped make some adjustments in your 15 years?
I'm about to start 15.
Wow. Good years.
Wonderful years.
My grief. How many students or cadets are there at one time?
There are approximately 4,000 at a time.
Similar to the Air Force Academy?
Yes.
My goodness.
And they receive about 15,000 applications a year, and they'll take about 1,200 of those annually.
Are students required to go to chapel?
Not anymore. In the 70s, that was changed.
All over.
All over.
And but there is a group of students who are talented musicians who come to the academies. I know I have heard at the Air Force Academy from jazz groups to the vocal groups, very talented young people who come. So you have certainly those who are being trained possibly to be soldiers.
Yes.
But are talented musicians.
Yes, a school like the Naval Academy or West Point and Air Force Academy draw typically a certain kind of individual, and often very motivated and driven. And Naval Academy touts itself as a school of engineering, and those minds that are very mathematical often correlate to music.
Often.
They do. And there have been a number of Naval Academy midshipmen and graduates who were offered scholarships to the Eastman Conservatory, Juilliard, and other music schools that just chose military service instead of the musical career. And it's fascinating. So you see this come in, and my position affords the opportunity to work with these young men and women and letting them keep honing those skills and using those as an outlet psychologically, emotionally, artistically, which is part of feeding the human soul, because we're not training robots. We're training people. And in order to be good leaders, you have to care about your people. And you have to show them that, and you have to be sincere about it. And so you're dealing with human minds and intellects. And it is very, very important to feed that part of people when they have those aspects. Some people are very gifted in sports. Other people are gifted in other areas. And this is part of that well-rounded education opportunity. And many of these young men and women will go on to become leaders of national and international rapport. And they need to have some exposure to what arts are and culture of that vein and in those genres. And it's very, very important.
Are most of those cadets taking courses or lessons as an elective? Would they get credit for it, or are they doing it, as you mentioned, because it's so much a part of who they are?
Currently, they don't receive official credit. They are required to have a certain number of hours of what are deemed as extracurricular activities. And these are some of those options and choices that are available to them.
Well, it's a shame, really, that they don't get some kind of credit, because they, by and large, the students that I've had who have been accepted at one of our academies have, as you hinted to, they're very disciplined. They have goals. They're driven in a good sense, by and large. That word "driven" sometimes has taken on a negative, and I mean that positively. And truly, most are leaders in their own right and are going to even become have a bigger stage for their leadership. So I wish that they had. I think our older universities and academies perhaps are a little slower to adapt to allowing such as that, perhaps. And I don't mean that in a critical way, but I think there would perhaps be more who would take advantage of continuing their what they're talented in, if they were getting some kind of credit.
Yeah, that has been discussed. So it's a goal.
Well, good. I'm pleased at that. I think in my generation, I minored in music, but we were not as encouraged to major, because a woman would have a hard time, as really men, making a living as a music major. And except for those of you who are extremely talented, the percentage of people who can go on and make a living even after getting a music major is very, very small.
Yes, it is. It's very challenging because the supply and demand is greatly out of balance.
Yes, and organ is one of those really narrowed.
Yeah, and it continues to narrow as the culture changes. And we're all wondering and waiting to see if it's going to be somewhat cyclical, particularly in church music, where right now contemporary music is a very big thing. And only history will tell whether we go back to a more traditional form of worship and hymnody vice all contemporary things. And I'm a big advocate of the hymn book.
No, me too, Monty.
I really am. And surely, first off, because of the richness in the texts, the lyrics, the theology, the teaching that is in the hymns, the great hymns of the faith. And there's much to be learned from them before you even talk about the musical style, but the content is so important. And I strive every opportunity I have to teach that and share that with the young men and women at the Naval Academy in the chapel. And we still have traditional form of worship in the main chapel. And it's a glorious thing. And just don't want people to ever limit themselves to only one style of music and worship. It's very, very important. And, you know, being a graduate of Lakeview High School and growing up in Lakeview, when I found myself walking down the streets of Philadelphia and Manhattan, and just so grateful for the many people in my life that have been so inspiring and encouraging, and people older than I that were full of wisdom. And the teachers that were caring through those years at Juilliard, Lincoln, and Lakeview, I would say thank you to them, the ones that are still with us, and also to the young people that are attending those schools and that will attend those schools. Don't ever give up. Set your goals high and stick to them. Set your standards high and stick to them. And don't compromise your belief system, your moral system, and your ethical system. Stand by it with fervor. It's so, so crucial in this day and age of an ever-changing world. Be strong.
Well, I wish that you had the opportunity while you're in town to see the facility changes that are taking place, have already taken place at Lincoln, and then we will be adding some more classrooms to Lakeview, but Juilliard is just going to be almost totally redone.
Wow.
The steel is up, so if you get a chance to drive by your elementary alma mater, you will be thrilled at what is in the process right now of taking place. And I know that there are people in this town who hope they can take just a little bit of credit for who you are and what you've become, Monty, because I do believe that it takes a village and we are not in isolation. It takes a great set of parents and friends and teachers, but a whole village of people who encourage young people to keep doing and keep working. And so you have blessed us and our audience in this community as they listen to this interview, who I'm sure many will be sitting there with huge smiles going, we are so proud of Monte Maxwell.
Well, I will say thank you also to two other churches that were influential, providing opportunity, and that would be First Methodist Church and First Christian Church, and many wonderful people in those congregations. And most of all, my parents, Sylvia and Earl Maxwell. Daddy passed away about 6 years ago in February. But Mom and Daddy were very, very supportive, and my younger brother Lance. And they had lots of questions. You want to what?
Where?
Yeah. And but they were always very supportive and
sacrificial.
Very sacrificial, and driving me to hear other great artists in Dallas and Houston and any place that we could get to. And
paying for all those lessons.
All those lessons.
All those lessons.
Yeah, many, many lessons.
Yes.
And listening to that piano go in the house, they would compete with the TV.
And it wasn't always pretty.
Oh, heavens no. One of my teachers that I respect and admire so much, Jerry Hancock and John Weaver. They were my two teachers from Curtis and Juilliard. Jerry taught me improvisation at Juilliard, and he said, as a native Texan, he said, just think in a full career how many wrong notes we play. And I thought, what a great perspective, because it's a humbling one. And a reminder to always strive to grow, because you'll never be fully grown. No. Always be growing.
And you still have to practice.
Yes, definitely.
You don't ever arrive.
No, I've been practicing since I've been home for the program last night.
Good for you. Well, we are blessed to have Monte Maxwell from San Angelo, Texas at the Naval Academy. And I'm going to come hear you play.
I hope you can.
And we'll take some other folks with me.
Good. Good.
Thank you, Monty, so much.
It's a pleasure.